faster because you may have seen it before, but it helps us to map out our strategy and project. And I think one of the biggest exciting parts of the cohort for us this year was just being able to have something like GitHub available. It helped us think a little differently about how we're going to create our project for more of a sustainable future, because I think we all want to come back in the spring and build on where we left off. Now, when we started the Unity 3D project, we know that Unity 3D has just an immense amount of capability and features. It can be somewhat intimidating, but once you unlock some of its potential, it's a perfect fit for an xAPI type experience because there's just so much going on in that scene that we can track, manage, and report on. And then, of course, our goal was to figure out how to distill that down into more of an e-learning type of experience. I would say we didn't attach everything to e-learning yet, but we had to start with a foundation. And so by using GitHub, along with the GBLxAPI profile, which I understand had a really good start here and some really amazing work being done, and it's been introduced before, we thought we would use that as the starting point. And so our idea was to spin up the GBLxAPI, basically get all the scaffolding and the foundation in place in a base Unity 3D scene so that we would have a shared starting point, because a lot of the effort in a Unity scene is just getting everything ready, getting it prepared. So we're really grateful for that xAPI profile to let us get quickly started. So that was a successful test because we put that scene in place out in GitHub. Jay was able to download it and begin kind of iterating, as well as myself. So let's talk about what our goal was once we had the base platform done, and I'll close that for a minute. Now, I chose Learning Locker just because that's what I'm familiar with, but Jay chose Watershed, which just kind of proves the interoperability of these platforms. And of course, I went into it from an open source perspective as well, just because I know there's the fully hosted version, but I wanted to make sure that anything we build here in this environment is truly reusable, easily accessible, and gives more people a chance to experience this whole idea of Unity 3D and xAPI. So then let's talk about the xAPI side for a moment, and then I'll go from there. So we took the GBLxAPI approach, and then we really started diving down as what are we trying to do here. So I think any good project deserves a design spec. It was really easy to map it out here because we mapped it to what the GBL spec does. We know that it has, beyond our standard events, it has the idea of a catalog of different verbs and activities. I think I even expanded it here to say that GBL specifically dives even deeper into these features that help you really understand your curriculum. So our goal is to mine this even further. Okay, so I'll go into that. But then from our actual, how would we map this to our own 3D scene? We thought we would have levels. And we really just, if you think about it, we're at the beginning of this journey. So the practice space, why we called it the xAPI Sandbox, is just so we'd have a place to practice and work. But as soon as we get beyond that, which you may see today is a little bit about how about some very easy objectives. Let's get learners understanding what this thing is and how to use it, and then we can even go into the more advanced technologies. So that's all I'll say on xAPI theory anyway. Now let's go into practice. Now it's time to build something in Unity. So we did that. Now what you'll see in orange is where we are today. But we also wanted to map this out kind of like a roadmap if someone else were to jump in at any time. So it's step-by-step instructions. Well, you'll have to download Unity if you want to use Unity. You'll have to get the xAPI GBL assets. You'll probably need Visual Studio and so on. So that's kind of the prerequisites. So anybody who's out there today or in the future who wants to jump into this cohort, it won't be that hard to pick up wherever we leave off because we're going to track everything here. But I do want to talk about the builds themselves. So by taking this base platform, Jay and I were both able to spin off in our own directions. I'll show you the work that I did, but I really want to check in first with Jay because I think he really took it in a whole different direction, which truly is the exciting part of how a team can come together and yet still build independently. So before I go any further, Jay, Are you able to hear us or connect via phone? And if not, we're kind of prepared to, I'll slide over to my demo, and then Jay, anytime, just coordinate with us and we'll get you online here for sure. So let's talk about build. We'll call it, build 1 was just build the basic framework that's out on GitHub. Build 2 is downloaded and branched, so now it's local on my PC. As I make changes and design features, I can upload them back into the GitHub, so we can always go into sub-teams. I believed that one of the hardest parts of any 3D scene is the idea of navigation. So that's kind of where I wanted to start. A learner, if you're a seasoned gamer, you have no problem navigating through Xbox and any number of controls. But for a typical kind of a corporate learner who may not have been exposed, which that there's a big cultural shift. Everybody has getting good VR experiences. But I wanted to make sure that we were building a scene that could handle that. So I'll just switch over to that scene. You can see what it looks like. Now, once again, we'll call this programmer development art. I purposely did not put any fancy high-end textures in here because I didn't want that to be a distractor. I really wanted to focus on the functionality. Some of you may have already seen this in an earlier demo, but even if you have or haven't, I will just show it again today. So this would be the equivalent of a sandbox scene focused on navigational waypoints. So when I hit play, I'll actually go into full screen mode. Why not? Let's do that. So go into play mode, and you'll notice something that we've added is we need the user to at least enter your email so we know who you are. We know that mbox is an xAPI requirement if you want to be tracked by email, or you may decide to be tracked by something like a random name, and if you click on this hashtag, it's kind of a more anonymous ID, if you will, that we can track. But that's important because everything starts with tracking. If I have your information in the system, when we begin the scene, whatever that scene might be, I can submit or start the scene. That actually reports back to the LRS, so I'll just do that now just for fun. And once again, this is the fundamental work that's already been done in xAPI. Where I'm working on is these little green disks become the journey that you take as a learner. So maybe this is level 1, and the idea here is, well, it may not be a linear journey. I may want to learn in a nonlinear fashion, so I'll just pick the first waypoint, and the navigation takes me there. That's a lot easier than me having to figure out how to get to this spot. So you'll notice that the camera oriented itself to this hotspot, if you will. And now if I want to get interactive, that's really up to the 3D designer to decide what do you do here. So in my case, I'm in a sandbox. I just want to play with parts and pieces. They're enabled with physics, so they're very easy to move, and I actually have the ability to slide them into space and back now, which I thought was another good way to be able to interact with content. Really just using the physics capabilities built into Unity at this point. But if you think about it, maybe the objective here, now I haven't put all of the xAPI statements on, but it could be I clicked on box 1 and I placed it here. Or maybe the idea is finish, putting one box on top of another, right? And stacking boxes could be the activity. But now, in a typical xAPI sense, those are all objectives. If Unity knows that I've completed this level, or this objective of this level, it may mark this green waypoint complete, but it's really time to move on to the next one. So I click on that, and once again, using some camera orientation math, it kind of puts me in the right place. So whatever animation or interactive, it could be a machine, it could be a high-end device, it could be electrical work, it could be game-style storyboarding, with different characters, whatever it is, we're now on scene 2. Then I thought, okay, kind of stuck on the ground here, let me move to maybe a higher vantage point. Well, the system still works. It just kind of brings me to that marker, which could be anything in the scene. So obviously there's a lot of design work and 3D building that could be done here, which is kind of where Jay took over with his scene. Uses something called Pro Builder. It's a free 3D modeling tool that just comes along with Unity now. You plug it in and you can create activities. So, so we'll actually create geometry that you can interact with. So I think you're seeing the beginnings, the very early beginnings of a waypoint nav system. What's interesting here for us is, let's say you did have a VR set of goggles on. Well, we're trying to constrain our navigation the same way as if you had a fully immersive headgear. So right now I'll simulate what it would be like if I had VR headsets on. I could look left, I could look right, I could move on to another waypoint. It'll help me get there rather than me just clicking randomly anywhere in a scene. You know, we may open it up for free play mode at some point. There's nothing wrong with that, of course, but we wanted to make this so easy and adaptable. What I'd like to do now, just to be sensitive of time, is just switch over to a little bit of what it takes to pull all this together, and then we'll look at the data and open it up for any questions, of course. So all of this work, this heavy lifting, is done in with some of the scripts that are the scripting that's provided through the GBL side of the house. And you can see here in this main script, it's called main. You know, I won't go into all the coding, but you just see that it's really just two things that tracked everything going on here, the start activity. By starting this, by clicking that button, I started using the GBL source code, right? It says it initializes it, and that's all that is. I didn't write any of this, thank goodness it was there. But what is really important is once a statement is actually clicked, once a button is clicked, everything just gets sent to the GBL interface, which processes the messaging in language that xAPI can understand. So now I'll switch over to the Wayfinder code just for fun. You can see that, you know, this was more of the journey into code that I decided to take, but this is how you can use math to control how a camera moves and make sure that waypoints are selected, make sure that you know, things happen the way you expect. And I like to comment everything I'm doing, test everything. I comment like crazy, probably would require some cleanup of the code before I launched anything live, but it's just a fun way to spend some hours getting used to coding and trying Unity features, knowing that at the end of the day, all of this code, including the drag and drop code, right? So this drag and drop code means if I've clicked on something and it's dragging, I can track where it's going. Think about what you can do in xAPI with that. You can track how long people click things or why they click them and where they put them, and really understand the behavior of your audience. So I won't go any more into code because, you know, that's just probably hard to see from a distance in the room. But if it's something that you are an expert at and you want to jump into this cohort, you know, by all means, this is a great area where we can build upon. If you're a 3D artist and designer, take advantage of the starting point and just start building really pretty content, knowing that it is trackable. So when I say trackable, I'm really talking now about Learning Locker, for example. Okay, so I'm switching gears here. You're seeing the end result of open source Learning Locker just being set up with a test, a little shovel to represent our sandbox. But you can see that the fact that I started this activity and maybe even completed it, that's really just some of the basic tracking. In the spring of this year, I had a lot more types of activities, but this is sort of a rebuild, so I'm just keeping it simple. But you can also see there's a lot of visualizations that take place on a dashboard, not only the popular verbs or statements, but now you can start to see, well, there's sort of an upward trend happening here. That's good. That means either the scene is being used or I've been in there a lot. Either way, it just shows that once I put this out there to a pilot audience, I can begin to see how the scene is being used, what activities are people doing, or maybe more importantly, what they're not doing. So maybe I need to change the game so that people find things easier. You know, that's really the next level. And then, of course, I can see by day, which comes back to, I'm really just speaking of Learning Locker now. You may be using a different LRS, but hopefully it has really good data visualization tools where you can create your own, go into the source of the data, which would look like, you know, this well-formed data here. But you can see it's pretty fast. I mean, it's actually, it'll say seconds ago. If I did a start and finish, it would say that this test user completed this scene
and I can go right in and start to really untangle what exactly an xAPI statement looks like from the GBL, and GBL, by the way, game-based learning xAPI. If you didn't know that, I just wanted to not just call it GBL, but game-based learning xAPI has so much behind it, all those things that you saw in my mind map of this. But if you scroll down just enough and collapse it, or you could hide some of this when you send the statement, here's the fun part. Where I left off was the actor and the verb and the object. That's the base for all statements. I was able to get my email to come through from that form field, probably more hard-coded right now, but because I was just getting Mbox to work. But the idea is I learned something. I'll just kind of leave off with what I learned. xAPI will protect itself from getting multiple IDs. So in other words, it will only allow a user name or an Mbox, but not usually both. So I had to rescript some of the behind-the-scenes code to get my mailbox identifier to come through. But the reason I was doing mailbox is I believe that there's a good use for using my email, because I think from a learning perspective, a learning design perspective, if I do something in a 3D scene and I'm identifiable by my email, then maybe that could trigger an email that says, hey, here's some recommended things you can do later that may not have anything to do with 3D. And that kind of gets into that whole Internet of Things philosophy. So that's pretty much kind of where I'm going. One of the more recent learnings was using Mbox as part of this experience, because it wasn't natively built in. It kind of didn't work for a while, but I got it working. Where I'm going next is how do we use that email to drive reinforcement of the experience of a learner. So hey, Eric, I see you were in this scene for 4 hours. You might want to watch this video, or you might want to try something new in the 3D scene to kind of keep it a closed loop. So that's pretty much the journey from beginning to end of where we started, where we're at. I want to do one more call out for Jay to see if you're online. Jay, are you there? And if not, or there's been any connectivity issues, I would highly encourage in the spring or at any time that we can continue this journey, we would love to start with what Jay built, because he did some really exciting things using other features of Unity, but really all under the same umbrella of what we just shared here. So I'll kind of open it up now. Not sure exactly how much time we have left, maybe 10 minutes or less, but I'd love to just open it up for questions, comments. I'll keep sharing, but I just want to go to the chat window to see if I can pick up on any other questions we may have. Otherwise, thank you so much for letting me present today, and I hope you have a good rest of the event. I see Jay is typing, so let's see how his response comes in. Jay could not connect, so no worries at all, Jay. I think if hopefully I've represented your great work and participation in this, and once again, just want to keep the lines open for a few minutes for any questions. I'll go back to the Unity 3D scene, because honestly, that's where all the fun is. And while we're waiting, I'll just hit play again. I'm not sure if the phone line itself is open, but I'm looking at chat right now, so feel free to moderate with me. We'll see where we go.
Yeah, this is Leanne from Torrance Learning. I would say if you have any questions, please throw them in the chat now. Otherwise, if it looks like there aren't going to be further questions, then we can work on getting Team Alexa set up.
Great. I see one question coming in. We'll give it just a minute. From Hayden. And let's see if I hit submit again, just for fun while we're waiting. Switch back to the learning locker, go back to the source, and we'll see a few seconds ago, my very last attempt came through, so it's near real time.
Let me turn it back then. I think I will conclude with this note, and I really once again appreciate the time today. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Eric. So I am going to switch over to Team Alexa. And if Izzy, Brian, and Helena would like to do sound checks, we can do that right now really quick. All right, I see, Helena, you raised your hand. Do you want to go ahead and test your audio? I'm not hearing anything if you're speaking into the microphone. Let me work on troubleshooting that for a minute here. Izzy or Brian, would you like to do a sound check?
Yes, this is Izzy here. Can you hear me?
I can.
Great. Thank you.
This is Helena. Hello? Hello? Can you hear me?
I can hear someone. You're coming in pretty quietly, though.
Can you hear me?
I can. You're still pretty quiet, Helena, and I apologize
Helena,
for
can you hear me
mispronouncing
now?
your name earlier. Yes, much better.
Can you hear me now?
Can you also promote Brian to?
Okay, go to
Can you also promote Brian? I think that he can't see the microphone option yet.
I think I connected. Can you all hear me?
Yeah, I see you now, Brian.
All right, great.
All right, perfect. I think we have everybody's audio working now. So if you guys want to go ahead and get started, we are ready.
Awesome. Thank you so much. So my name is Izzy, and Izzy Lara, and I am 1/3 of the team of Team Alexa, along with Helena Smith and Brian Wanzer, our team lead. And our presentation is titled, Have You Tried Turning It Off and On Again? Tech Support Training Using Alexa and xAPI. So in case you haven't heard of that specific question, have you tried turning it off and on again? It comes from a show called The IT Crowd. It's a British show. It's great. You can Google it. There's a link there to a YouTube thing that they have. It's great. Hilarious for tech geeks. So anyway, moving on. Can we advance? Thanks, Brian. So our scenario was, as you can imagine, training our users to troubleshoot technical issues over the phone. So Alexa served as our customer, and she would speak some audio, like my computer won't turn on, and then provide a couple of options for the user to select from. The user then would select one of the options, and then in the background, what's actually happening is we are capturing that entire interaction and sending an xAPI statement directly into the Watershed LRS. I mention without Zapier because in previous cohorts, Team Alexa has used Zapier as an intermediary between Voiceflow, which is the platform that we use to develop our Alexa Flow, and our watershed LRS, I was able to actually remove the Zapier thing completely, so we're going directly from Voiceflow into the LRS. And then another thing I wanted to point out was that we're also capturing the xAPI statement ID. So whenever you send an xAPI statement into an LRS, the LRS generates a statement ID and actually returns it back to you. So Voiceflow allows you to capture that and save it for future use in case we ever wanted to do that later on. So essentially what happens is we continue sort of this cycle of Alexa as a customer saying something, Alexa provides a couple of options, the user selects one of the options, we capture the information and send the xAPI statement, and then we move on to another interaction. That cycle sort of continues until we reach the end and the customer can't really do anything more, the user can't do anything more for the customer, and then at the end, Alexa will actually tell you how many interactions you got right and provide some customized feedback for you. This is an existing workflow that Brian helpfully found from the Community College of Rhode Island. I know it's a little bit hard to read it, but basically it provides a flow for how to do technical issues. So if somebody calls in and at the very top you can see the PC will not boot or start up, the next question is it plugged in? And there's a yes, no in there, and then there's another question around is the power strip plugged in? Do you see the message invalid system disk? So there's various questions and flows that you can follow, and we kind of use this as our blueprint for the Alexa skill. So just to kind of hammer home the point or the flow here, we have some dialogue that Alexa speaks. My computer won't turn on. She provides a couple of options for you, such as is the power cord plugged in? The user, we capture the user's intent, so whether they say something like the first one, or A, or B, or the third one, Alexa is able to disambiguate between all of those and figure out which one you're talking about. We set a few variables after that, like if the user selected the correct response or not, and also the full text of their response. And then finally, we send that xAPI statement out to the watershed LRS. So now I'll hand it over to Brian to talk through the Voiceflow platform.
Thanks, Izzy. So what you're seeing on the screen now is the Voiceflow platform. It's a drag and drop tool that you can use to create Alexa skills or Google Home skills. Fairly easy to use. What you're seeing looks somewhat complex, but it's actually fairly easy to build. So to sort of orient yourself to this, if we look at the top line, you can kind of see each of those steps that Izzy was talking about. So the big block in the top left is a number of speech blocks. One cool feature that we used with this tool is we can use different voices. So not just the normal default Alexa, but we use one called Joey to act as the customer, so that the learner could hear two different voices, distinguishing between who the actual customer is and then Alexa sort of the tour guide of the skill. And then the big block in the below that sort of set is where we're capturing the user intent. And as Izzy mentioned, we can provide synonyms for those for each of those. So the user might not always say A, they might say the first one, they might say whatever came first, right? There's lots of different things in there. So we made sure to build those in to make it as easy to use as possible. And then you can follow the arrows to sort of where the path goes next. So if the user says answer A, it goes to what you can see there as a set block. That's where we set all of our variables. We're capturing what the user said, how many questions that they had attempted, whether or not they got it correct, all those kinds of things. And then following the arrow farther to the red block there is our API block. That's where we're sending our statement to Watershed, capturing what the user said and some of those other variables. That's a cool thing about this system as well, is that we can use those internal variables within Voiceflow to send our statement. So for example, at the very beginning of the skill, Alexa asks for the user's name, and that's the name that we use in our xAPI statement, which is pretty cool. And then it's off screen, but from there, we continue on to whatever next was in the flow. One other cool feature I wanted to make sure that I pointed out that we used was a random block. So Voiceflow will decide randomly which direction to go. So that can have the user answering yes to a question or answering no to a question. So each time a user starts the skill, the idea is that they'll never have the same interaction twice, or at least it'll take them a lot of times going through the skill. So they kind of have to think on their feet, be able to adjust based on what Alexa says, and then practice a number of times as well. So we put together a little video demo. You won't actually see an Alexa a device using the skill. What you'll see is what's called the Amazon Developer Console, or the Alexa Developer Console. It's pretty easy from Voiceflow to that console. You just click one button and that skill will publish in development. So this is an opportunity to test any skill, sort of see the JSON inputs and outputs along the way, a way to troubleshoot. The nice thing about it is that you can type in answers or type in what you would say to the Alexa device, which is what you'll see here. So you won't actually hear me speaking, but you do get to hear Alexa and the other voice, Joey, respond to each of those things. You'll also see on the right side of the screen each of the xAPI statements as they happen. So as they get sent, you'll see an example of kind of high level what we're capturing. And it might not play. And it looks like we're having a little trouble with the video, getting it to play.
It's not playing at all on your end?
No, I click on it and it opens up in my browser.
Can we try sharing your screen? Would that work?
Yeah, I'm just nervous that the audio is not going to play through Adobe Connect.
Yeah, video can be hard with Adobe Connect, but we've had some success
This
with
conference has reached its maximum duration and will end in 1 minute.
All right, we also may have to call back in on the phone.
Okay. What I might be able to do is send you the video, and then maybe you could play it on your side.
We can try uploading it, but we might end up having the screen share too. So if you want to try on your end first, that might be more efficient.
Sure.
All right, and I'm going to dial back in really quickly. All right, we should be back on the phone.
Goodbye. Joining conference now.
All right, this is Leanne from Torrance Learning. I apologize for the audio difficulties that we seem to be experiencing. Were we going to try for a screen share for the video?
Why don't we continue with the rest of the stuff just to make sure we have enough time to get through it, and then if we have some time at the end, I can either share the video or we can try a screen share. Cool.
That's great.
Well, I guess this is my part. So I I basically developed these statements, the xAPI statements. So here is what you're going to see from coming from the LRS. You can see that a couple of things that I've pointed out here. It includes the name of the participant, so we capture that at the very beginning. We have the verb answered for most of our interactions, except for the very beginning. I think we use either launched or initiated. I can't remember which one it is. And then at the very end, which if we would have gone through the demo, I would have been able to tell you, you would hear the results and some personalized feedback based on which options you selected incorrectly. So in that case, when you're listening to the feedback, we use the verb experienced for that. We also, for each interaction, we have an identifier, a letter coded to each one. So if we're looking at the LRS statements, we can see at a glance at which point in the flow the user is at. So as an example here, you can see we've coded the object as IT customer service : interaction M answer. As far as the result, we have the raw score, which I use to store the number of correct responses. We have the success and completion flags. The completion flags are almost always true as long as the user provides a valid input. The success flag is only set to true when they select the correct answer for that interaction. And then we also store the user selected response in that result block. And then finally, I guess the thing that I really love the most is I actually store a registration ID with every single statement because I'm hoping that in the future we'll be able to actually retrieve statements directly from the LRS. And this is the best way to really do that, to make sure that we're only getting statements related to this specific flow that the user launched, and also to make sure that it's only for this specific user. So every single statement will have the same registration ID for each initiation of the call. Helena, did you want to talk through this?
You hear me?
Okay. Yep, there we go.
Okay, you can hear me now?
Perfect.
Okay, great. Well, anyway, so this is Helena, and these are some of the lessons that we learned in this cohort, which was, I think the main one is that you plan ahead, very early exactly what is it you want to do. Please storyboard out your scenario of the skill. After that's been put together, so you can take that information and place it right into the prototype and work out all the kinks and just move on from there. I think for as far as creating a template, which is really like I think I'm just kind of mention it, you don't want to go back over and over and over again to recreate the same scenario over again. So it's really good to create a template. Also, for me, in the previous cohort, we used xAPI to send our statements over to LRS. In this cohort, we didn't have to do that, which was a great discovery. So we eliminate the middleman in the situation. A couple of things I kind of mentioned here that I had an issue with just understanding a few of the blocks. One of them was the intent block, but also a few of the other blocks. But after doing this for a second or third go around, I'm finally kind of figuring out how each of the blocks work, the purpose of the block, and that actually made me feel a little more comfortable just go around the cohort. And the last thing is that not all LRS are alike. So, for example, you can use a verb that's not one ADL verb, and that verb, still the information will be tracked, but it might not be the verb that you selected when you see it in the statement. It might say it was just an interaction or the user experienced something. Depends on the LRS. And to even talk about that a little bit further, is he experienced a situation when he used two different LRSs, Watershed versus Storm Cloud? Now let Izzy talk about that situation from his lessons learned.
Yes, thank you, Helena. So as I was troubleshooting some of the statements I was creating through Voiceflow, I had obviously our watershed LRS that I was sending stuff to in our Team Alexa project, but I also created a separate Voiceflow account with my personal email, and I connected it to a Storm Cloud account just to try and verify that my statements were valid or working. And there was one particular instance where I was trying a registration ID. So if you saw, like, Brian, if you can go back to the previous slide, you can see at the bottom I mentioned that context registration ID that I added. So when I was testing it with StormCloud, I was able to just put in like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and it worked. So my assumption then was that there was something weird going on with Watershed. As it turns out, Watershed was correct in not accepting 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 as a registration ID because the xAPI standard actually states that a registration ID has to be a UUID, which is a very specific format. It has to have a certain number of numbers and letters, and so that's why the lesson learned for me was just that you can't always trust that, just because an LRS accepts your xAPI statement doesn't mean that it's necessarily 100% valid. So I think, Brian, if you can advance the next slide, and then I think the last one is just whether we have any questions. So I think we have like 2 or 3 minutes left for that. Okay, well, I guess if there's no questions, then just wanted to say thank you, everyone, for joining our presentation. This was a really fun project, and I hope to be able to continue this in the spring.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Team Alexa, and thanks again to Team Unity 3D. That concludes the end of this session, and our next session will start up again at 1:45.